Hello. Today I've decided to write a devlog since forever ago, it feels like. Anyways, I've been busy. The game has a working dialogue system, there's been some gentle nudges towards a more thorough combat system, and the game has a working command bar. There's also some minor sound design stuff, minor polish for the protagonist, and tasteful jiggle physics. Another important piece of the game design puzzle is the file select menu, which is admittedly still in the works, but it sure feels good. I've also started work on various settings, including audio and video settings. Recently, I've decided to have the game rendered at a lower internal resolution, which affords the game a kind of charm I rather like. Let's talk. Just before writing this, I aimed for getting a decent dialogue system that I could use with a simple scheme. The lines of spoken dialogue are all arranged in an array and are kept in a reasonably sized dialogue tree. Each tree has its lines of dialogue arranged in a sort of numerical order, and each line has at least one dialogue choice. Each choice then has a whole number that represents where that choice, when selected by the player, takes the dialogue to. All negative numbers are treated like a termination of discussion. This by itself isn't super sophisticated, but having a dialogue system that works was a good starting point. I ruminated on an idea of how to drive action and conditions for dialogue to be more dynamic, for player choices both in and outside of the dialogue to possess consequence, and discovered the expression object. An expression could basically be conceived as the stuff on the right side of a variable assignment, or calling a method with parameters. Expressions opened the door to many possibilities, all of which naturally eclipsed with my needs for the dialogue system I envisioned. I simplified what could have been much more complicated by using aliases for potentially common instances for the expression to be executed on or as, like the protagonist, Aria, Reina, whoever the protagonist is speaking to, the root scene, internally referred to as main, the active save file, or the dialogue UI, which drives most of the behavior. If none of the aliases are used, the instance string is treated like an absolute node path. This fringe case might not be used in the end, though it may still have its uses. By using conditions, certain dialogue lines may have different progressions, and certain dialogue choices may or may not be available for the player to choose. With this system I designed, I realized I could conceivably create complex dialogue trees, which could be used for things like shopping or complex quest lines. The sky is the limit with it. Let's move on to the game's combat. Originally, I didn't have a whole lot of interesting combat mechanics besides the simple block, attack, and swanky movement animations. I felt that the game needed something a little more interesting, so I started tinkering with what scratch I still had left from my last import and came up with the system for dodging attacks. A lot of the work went first into the quick stepping motion, which was helpful in establishing how the movement direction impacted both the visuals and the practicality of a given direction. To make the game's combat a little more spicy, I made it possible for the player to, when evading at just the right time with no movement direction, automatically dodge in the right direction, which causes the enemy's movement to be slowed down for a brief moment. This ability will probably be granted to the player at some point in the adventure, though not given at the beginning for the purposes of progression. Something else I've started work on is blocking. Before, blocking was simple and without cost. You could block forever and ever, and all shields were basically the same. I deeply disliked this, since I wanted the player to think moment to moment in the game's combat, asking themselves questions like, can I block this or should I keep my distance, all to the rhythm of the battle. I came up with an implementation of a posture or stance meter, which I think most of the game's enemies might also use. I thought about the other ways in which posture could be depleted, which includes blocking within a certain time frame to intercept an incoming attack, a kind of parrying motion that's mapped to one button for easier controls. This parrying motion is unfinished, though I'll be looking into making animations for intercepting an enemy's attack. Speaking of enemies, I intend on having a new enemy to test the game's combat on, besides the charming red cylinder. I hope to have it done sometime around September, maybe October. For the purpose of easier debugging and testing, I've made some modifications to a command bar so graciously provided to the public by Jitspo. If you like game dev nonsense, or just like admiring a handsy mustache when you see one, consider giving his channel a look. I at least owe him a shout out for the swaggy command bar. I mean, it was so easy to implement new commands. Things like obtaining a list of maps, loading into a different map, getting a list of entrances for a given map, loading into that map with a specific entrance, altering save data, altering game settings, and EBDB. In the future, I plan on making some more commands like spawning enemies and other game objects, which will make extensive testing a little easier. Speaking of testing, I think it's about time I brought up the itch.io page where test builds of Entry are being hosted. Before, I kept things a little more private, though it seems like members of my community have been too busy to test the game. I'll be opening the itch.io page, and the builds will be accessible without a password. The game is steadily marching towards foundational completion, and I hope to start investigating content development before New Year's. There may be a few moments of code-based recall or refactoring, and there may be some bugs to fix, but I feel confident in my ability to make this game, even if I have to do a lot of the lifting at times. I won't be able to catch everything, though, so I invite you to check out the game's Discord server. The link is in the description. Don't forget to say hi. For posterity's sake, I want to mention something I've been thinking about recently: crowdfunding. It's something that I've been considering, though I think it may be too early for that. I want to personally stress that while I will do my damnedest to see this game get finished, I also don't want to disappoint anyone who might fund this. Perhaps by the next devlog I'll have made a decision, and will announce it then. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.